This is Dr. Karen, and you are listening to the Facto Leaders podcast on the B Podcast Network, where I share up-to-date, evidence-based practices, my own experiences, and guest interviews designed to help pediatric therapists, educators, and aspiring school leaders design services that support social, emotional, and academic growth and set kids up for success in adulthood. Whether you want to learn effective strategies for your therapy session or classroom, be an influential leader on your team, or find creative ways to use your skills to advance in your career, I've got you covered. Hey everybody, it's Dr. Karen, and welcome to episode 169 of the De Facto Leaders podcast on the B Podcast Network. Today I wanted to share some frequently asked questions that I get on some of my training relating to executive functioning. I'd say a lot of these center around the same question, which is, I understand why I need to support executive functioning. I get why a lot of the things that are currently being done are not working, but how do I actually support these skills? Now, part of the reason that a lot of my free materials focus on the why is just because that question is incredibly complex in itself. And a lot of times, if you get to the how and the specific implementation before people understand that full context, there isn't good follow through with the implementation because they might not fully understand what exact skills they're trying to get at. They may be focused more on external skills instead of those internal skills that go with them. And then things tend to get lost, which is why there's so much confusion around how to support these skills to begin with. So I like to meet people where they're at and make sure that they're getting the right information at the right time. I know from doing a lot of trainings over the years and interacting with a lot of clinicians, parents, teachers, that you've got to give people the right information at the right time. And I know myself as a clinician that there were times when I wasn't fully able to implement something because I didn't have all the background knowledge. So I really do like to make sure that I'm giving people the right information that they need in order to be successful. And there were many times when I wanted to jump right to implementation, and then I tried to realize that, you know what, I needed to back up and deepen my understanding. So with all that being said, I did want to provide some additional context for some of those questions that people get, because I do understand that you get to a point where you're ready to move forward with implementation and you want to know the next steps. So some of the common questions that I get relating to executive functioning are things like, how do you teach self-talk, time perception, and strategic planning? So what does that actually look like in practice? Or how do you offer help without making kids prompt dependent? Or people might say things like, well, I understand that executive functioning intervention is more than just checklists and behavior charts, but what's the right way to structure interventions? If it's clinicians, a lot of times they might ask, how do I provide environmental scaffolding after students leave my therapy sessions? Especially if maybe they're not going to be able to follow their students around all day. Or even people want to know, what exactly is this environmental scaffolding that we keep talking about, and how does that look? Because if you're a teacher or a parent, you want to know what you're supposed to be doing. And if you're a clinician, you want to know what you're actually teaching the parents or the caregivers or whoever it is that's interacting with the child. What you want to know what exactly you're coaching them to do across the day. So I wanted to give some specific examples today. So what I'm going to share are 2 video clips, and I'm actually going to link to a blog post to an article that I published recently on my blog called What's Better Than an Executive Functioning Lesson Plan? Now, the reason that I wanted to emphasize this is because I get a lot of questions from clinicians about, well, like they'll say things like, I really want some materials that I can use to support executive functioning, or I need some lesson plans to teach my students executive functioning skills. Or they might even say things like, I have a 20-minute session with students and I have to do a social skills group, or I have to do an executive functioning group with my students. And it has to be 20 minutes long and it has to include this many things and the materials have to go over X, Y, Z. And what they're outlining is what they think they need, but it's not actually what they need. So I wanted to give some additional context to how you can make a paradigm shift around the idea of a lesson plan, because it's not something that we want to completely throw out, but we want to look at it a little bit differently. So what I share in these videos is the concept of a scalable protocol. I'm actually going to link to another blog post that outlines in a little bit more detail kind of the big picture of why you want to think about scalable protocols in addition to just thinking about lesson plans. So that article is called Executive Functioning Support, 3 Paradigm Shifts for School Teams. And the idea is that, yes, as a clinician, you're going to have things that you are doing in your therapy sessions, and that might look like a lesson plan. And there might be certain things that you do in therapy sessions that it doesn't make sense for you to try to train other people in that specific protocol because it's specific to your discipline, and you are the one that needs to be delivering that directly. But there are other things that you want to think about, especially when it comes to social skills and executive functioning, where you want to think about scalable protocols, where you're using your therapy sessions to develop a protocol that can be shared with other people. So the first video clip that I'm going to share with you is a video that explains how that works in my program, the School of Clinical Leadership, where I am going to teach you, if you're a related service provider, teach you about the executive functioning skills that you want to build, but then give you some protocols that you can use where you're going to start in your therapy sessions and then eventually you're going to try to scale it and train other people in those things. So the first part of the video is I'm explaining a specific strategy in the School of Clinical Leadership that is designed to do that. You're going to want to also check the show notes and check out the blog post because there's some actual additional video content in that post where I'm doing a screen share. So obviously, because this is audio, I can't share it in the podcast episode itself, but you can hear the first part of the video to learn what's included and how I've outlined it. And then the second part, again, I'm including just the audio here. The second video is one example of a scalable protocol that I teach in the School of Clinical Leadership called the Time Tracking Journal. So again, check out the show notes and the blog post because you'll be able to see the video version of that I'm sharing. But I think you are going to be able to learn a lot from just listening to the audio in this episode. And what that protocol does is that it shows you how to help kids start using self-talk, how you can start to model that within specific daily activities, how you can start building time perception, as well as using that in a way when we're thinking about self-talk and time perception and planning. There are kinds of self-talk that are going to build our self-image and our confidence and our ability to take information from past situations and apply it to the situations that we're currently in now. So there's this strategic planning aspect, and then there's also the self-esteem aspect. So I'm going to go through an overview of that as well. Again, this is the high-level video. In the actual program, I go through the details about how to go through all these steps that I'm going to outline, as well as different types of language that you're going to want to use. And then the strategic plan for how you're going to roll this out to your whole team and develop your intervention plan. And then obviously in the program, I go through other protocols as well outside of this one. But this is going to give you an idea of an example, because I know that a lot of people want to at least hear some type of example of the how. I will say that one of the most common questions that I get about the School of Clinical Leadership, a lot of clinicians say, how much setup is this going to take? Or are there materials? Are you going to show me how to do evals? Are you going to give me evals? They want to know, can I take this Can I sign up for this program and then have something that I can take and go and implement right away? And so the short answer to that is that with this example that I'm going to give you, yes, this is something that you can do within the next couple months where you can learn it and you can start to see some results with your students in your sessions right away and give them a strategy to work with. But when you're thinking about the big picture, this is not going to be a quick fix. And I know that that's a challenging thing to hear, because if I were to give you some kind of a curriculum for executive functioning, and if it was going to be some kind of a print and go thing, then it wouldn't work. It would just be contributing to all of the problems that currently exist in the current system. So I don't want to do that. So my response to that is usually, I understand why that's what you want, but I can't give that to you because it's not going to solve your problem. So as I said before, the reason that I'm sharing this is because I want to help people make that shift away from thinking about lesson plans. So again, it's not that we're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater and completely get rid of that concept, but we want to use it in the right way. With all that being said, as I mentioned before, check the show notes. And also, if you are interested in learning the full protocol and learning how you can share this with your team, especially if you're a related service provider and you know that some of these supports need to be in place, then definitely check out the School of Clinical Leadership. So to learn more about that program, you're going to want to go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/clinical leadership. So that program is for you if you're a related service provider, like a social worker, a speech pathologist, a counselor, an OT, a psychologist, or somebody else who's providing those specialized interventions in schools, and you know that your students need some support, maybe at the tier 1 level all the way through the tier 3 level, and then through special education. Again, to check out that program, you're going to want to go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/clinical leadership. And then another thing to mention, I do get a lot of parents and teachers who watch some of my free trainings or listen to my podcasts as well. And a lot of them will say, hey, I know that I'm not in your intended audience, but I'm curious if you have something for teachers or for parents. So how I structure it for the clinicians is that in the School of Clinical Leadership, the time journal, which is what I'm going to share in this episode, is something that is one protocol within a bigger system. When I'm sharing this information with a therapist, it's designed to be something they use in their therapy sessions and then they scale it to other people. Now, that being said, I intend for them to be coaching and teaching some of these things to teachers and parents. So if you are a parent or a teacher, how it could work for you is that you could learn the time tracking journal directly from me if that is something that you're struggling with. If you're having a hard time with students who maybe don't get started with their work or they struggle with those day-to-day routines, then this is something that you could implement directly. So if you have questions, if you are a parent or a teacher, feel free to reach out to me because I do have a couple options for you. It's just we're taking more of a direct route and you can learn some of these things directly from me, particularly this strategy, if you're somebody who needs to just learn it for the kids that you're supporting now. So again, you can reach out to me, talk to me at drkarenspeech.com. If you are not a clinician, but you're curious about how you might be able to use some of these things to support kids that you're working with, whether it's your own children in your home or whether it is your students in your classroom. So with all that being said, I'm going to share the first video clip that explains a little bit about how this is structured in the School of Clinical Leadership. And then that will be followed by another clip that is going to give you of the time journal overview that's going to give you an idea of how you can start supporting self-talk and time perception and strategic planning in context. I talk a lot about executive functioning support across the day, not just in the therapy room, but environmental supports when kids leave your therapy room. And a lot of times people say to me, I understand why I need to support these skills and I understand what these skills are, but how do you actually do it? What does it actually mean to provide environmental scaffolding, to support executive functioning skills in context, and to build some of those skills that are going to help kids engage in visualization, seeing themselves finish an end goal, strategic thinking, as well as being able to perceive the amount of time that is passing. So what I wanted to do today is share one of my strategies that I teach in the School of Clinical Leadership. And I want to do this with a huge caveat here because I get a lot of questions about what lesson plans do you offer, what therapy materials can I have that I can use to print and go and do in my therapy sessions. There's a lot of questions about actual deliverables. And I am going to show you something that has deliverables with it. There are things that I am going to give in this tool that look like worksheets, things that could be deemed lesson plans. But I want you to take that out of your head for just a minute, because what I'm going to share with you is technically in workbook form. But the reason I do that is because I am giving something tangible that's going to document what the procedures are that you need to do in order for me to transfer the knowledge from my head to yours, so that what you can do eventually is not actually need any kind of lesson plan or protocol that is delivered in a worksheet. What you want to do when you're thinking about executive functioning is, yes, you have some documented operating procedures for your sessions. You have things that you're doing. Maybe you even have them written down in some kind of a notebook or worksheet or protocol somewhere that you have stored in a binder, for example, or maybe it's electronic. But you want to have that in your head so that you can eventually do a couple different things. Number one, you want to be able to be so fluid and automatic with that protocol and with those strategies that you could just, see a student in a situation where they're struggling. Maybe you are hopping into a classroom and a student needs some support getting started with a writing assignment. You want to be so fluid with this protocol that you could do it with a pencil and paper on the spot, or with a dry erase board and markers or something like that. Or you want to be able to know, what things do I have in my environment that I can pull in to do a lesson plan? And some of the things that I can think of off the top of my head that would be relevant for this would be things like an analog clock, or something like a calendar that you can actually write on. So something like that that's going to show time. And yes, you might have some digital tools that your students are using, but you want to make sure that you have those additional visuals that you can use to help students really understand and conceptualize the passage of time and things like that. The second thing that you want to be able to do, in addition to knowing how to do these strategies just on the fly, is that you want to be clear enough in what these protocols are in order to be able to coach and train other people. Because ideally, what I want people to do when they come into the School of Clinical Leadership is learn how to do these strategies with their students in their group sessions. But then the next stage of that is that you want to start coaching and training other people. So this could be if you are working with parents and you want to give them some strategies that they could use at home. In the school, one of the biggest things that you're going to want to be doing is making sure that you're training teachers or maybe other related service providers in these strategies, because what that's going to do is get to the point where those other people have automaticity with those strategies and everybody's on the same page and they know how to support students in those situations where they might need to get some modeling of self-talk, be reminded and get some cues to maybe use some of those strategies like looking at the clock, looking at their surroundings, things like that, knowing how to use the right language in that situation. So you want to get to the point where you could actually take that information that I'm giving you and create some training materials, do some consultation and coaching with other people so that you can share this knowledge with others and make sure that students get the access to those supports in other situations beyond your therapy room. Really, what's happening in your therapy room is just the starting point for you to get solid in those skills. Then you want to take those skills and be able to coach and train other people with them as well. And if you can share them with your other adjacent therapists, for example, like I'm an SLP, and if I could collaborate with the social worker and the psychologist or a counselor or other therapists, occupational therapists. I know I'm probably leaving a few people out here, but my point is that you can learn it, you can share it with your colleagues, and then you can divide and conquer. And maybe you have somebody else that helps you train and coach other people as well. So again, huge caveat. This is technically a worksheet, but it's way more than just a worksheet. The worksheet is just a delivery mechanism for me to give the knowledge to you. When we think about executive functioning, we've got to get away from this idea of the lesson plans and the therapy sessions being the totality of our interventions, because that's not going to work. This is the point in the video where I hopped over to the program and started giving a tour. So what I'm going to do now is jump to the next video in the post where I talk about the specific protocol in the strategy. Hey there, it's Karen. And in this video, I'm going to give you the overview of the stages in the time tracking journal. And I'm also going to talk about how long each phase should take. Because in the past, when I've gotten questions about the time tracking journal, people think that it needs to be more of a long, drawn out process than it actually is. And so I wanted to just give you a little bit of context for how this is going to work, and then also kind of break it up into stages so you can see how all of these pieces fit together, and also how you can kind of plan this in your head so you can see why we're doing what we're doing. Because when you're going to go through this process, really, ultimately, the actual journal itself and all of these supplemental materials I'm going to give you, like the Google Slides or the Google document, really, that's just a way for me to transfer this information to you. The main thing that needs to happen in order for kids to be successful is that they need to have a strategy that allows them to plan, and then also start to be more aware of time. And then also they need some good models so that they can start to learn to use inner self-talk for both building a positive self-image about themselves. And part of that is using their episodic memory and taking evidence and experiences from the past and applying them to new experiences and building that self-belief that they can do whatever it is that they're wanting to do. So making them feel successful, but also part of that self-talk is strategy self-talk. So really what we need to do is be modeling that for kids along the way, because if they're having executive functioning issues, then they're probably not engaging in that self-talk. So this journal is just a way to help structure the process of helping kids plan and execute on difficult tasks and really walking them through the steps that they should be doing in their heads. We're just taking something that should be going on internally and making it external for them. And really the goal is for this process to be kind of condensed over time. So it is going to take a little bit longer the first couple times you do it, but ultimately what you want to do is start to create some tools for kids to have so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you do this for a new task. And eventually you'd hope as you start doing this for more and more things in a child's day, whether it be academic, whether it be things in their home environment, as you do this, you would hope that they would start to be applying this to new experiences. So the more you do this, the more that kids are going to be able to do that. So the time journal itself is going to be broken down into 5 key stages. So I'm going to walk through them right now. And then when you watch the longer video, you're just going to get a little bit more of an in-depth explanation of what needs to happen. So the first set of questions that you're going to see in the journal that you're going to want to walk kids through is the setup phase. Now, this total setup phase, again, yes, the first few times you do it, you're not necessarily going to be as familiar with the strategy. The child is not going to be as familiar. So it might take a little bit longer, but ultimately you can get through this in 3 to 5 minutes or maybe less, because it's really just kind of a quick setup conversation here. And the main things that you're going to be asking is, how long will this task take? And then you're going to be asking some questions about some basic if-then type of things. So those pros and cons questions that I'm going to guide you through, they should really just take a couple minutes. And then there's going to be some questions where we're going to be using tests of evidence, where we're going to talk to kids about how hard they think it's going to be and just kind of get their take on it. And then we're going to compare the before and after. And again, those things, you should be able to just talk through them. It's just kind of a quick conversation, and it really should just take a couple minutes. So all of this whole thing, this whole setup phase, the how long will this take, the pros and cons, how hard is this, should take less than 3 to 5 minutes. And again, when you get good at this, it can be really just kind of a quick boom, boom, boom conversation. So again, you don't want to make this a whole long drawn out discussion. It's just really a quick check-in here. And like I said, once you do this a couple times with a task, you're not really going to have to spend a long time here. And again, the main thing that you want to do is we want to talk about how long this is going to take. And then the main thing that we want to do as well is you're going to want to have your clock. So you're going to actually want to have a physical clock, and you're going to want to show kids how long it will take on the clock so that they can physically see from where the minute hand is going to move from here to here. That's how long it's going to take. So they need to see something visual. So the main thing that we want to do here, kind of the most important part of this setup phase, is showing them to see that time on the clock. So that's the main thing here. And then, so this is the setup phase here. And then we're going to move up to the planning phase. Now, the planning phase is where you're actually going to get into the strategy of what the steps are and the planning for whatever it is that you're doing. Now, here, what's going to happen is that the first time you do a task, you are going to have to really talk through a lot of the steps. So you're going to talk about what time you're starting. You will have already talked about how long it will take. So you're going to talk about the start time. You're going to talk about what the end goal is and how that looks and feels. And then you want to talk about what you actually need. So what actual materials you need to get ready, and then what the steps are, what you actually need to do. So the first time you do this, if it's something that you haven't walked kids through before and you haven't used this strategy with them, it is going to take a little bit longer. You are going to need to spend a little bit more time actually mapping out what you need to do and then what the steps are. So that might take a little bit longer that first time, because you're going to be actually mapping out all those things, writing things down. And I also do recommend that you make this as visual as possible. So you might have to do some prep work here that first time, where you might be taking pictures of the child doing the actual steps. I recommend that if you have kids where you're writing the steps down and that's not working, it might need to be more visual for them. So we want to make this as visual as possible, especially what the end goal looks like. We want to make that visual, and then possibly we want to make the steps visual as well. So the first time you do this, it is going to take a little bit longer, but then what you have is that you can take what you made the first time, and then the next time you're doing whatever the routine is, you might just need a quick 1 to 2 minute check-in. Okay, here's what done looks like. Here your steps are. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So the next time you do it, it might be a simple matter of, all right, let's go back to this, this checklist of things that we did before. Let's review them and let's move forward. So again, the first time you do it, it is going to be a little bit longer, but then what you can do, if it's a routine that the child does over and over again, that you can keep whatever you made that first time, and then it's not going to take as long. So keep that in mind. This is something, again, that's going to be condensed as you move through this. And then also, once you do this with a couple different routines for the child, they might be able to move this through this whole process a little bit more quickly because they understand how to do it. So ideally, that's what we would want, is that we'd want them to understand, okay, well, we're going to talk about how long it takes. We're going to talk about how hard it is. Then we're going to move through, and we've got to figure out what the goal is, what that looks like. And then we've got to talk about our steps and what we need. So they'll know that process. That's the whole point. And that's what we do when we're using our executive functioning skills. We want them to get familiar with these steps. We want them to use it for novel situations. And we're just going to be adding to this over and over, and just gradually adding this to different routines over time. But of course, you do want to utilize those visual strategies that you've already made so that they can, again, you don't want to reinvent the wheel if you already went through this and talked about the steps for a certain task. So that planning phase is going to be your most time-consuming piece of this, especially that first time, but it can get less time-consuming as you go through it. And then the next questions that we have, these things on the next pages of the journal are going to be things that you're going to be wanting to model for the child as you're supporting them through the task. And then as they do the task over and over again, you're going to want to do that less and less, because you want them to be doing those or asking themselves those questions on their own and learning to monitor themselves. But the first couple times kids do this, you are going to have to kind of be there with them, do the activity with them, and then model some of that talk that you would be doing yourself if you're in the middle of doing something and you're thinking, oh, wait, whoops, did I miss a step here? And you're going to want to do those things out loud, because again, remember, you're modeling the things that are going on in your head. You're doing it externally. So those next questions on the next section are going to take, again, those are kind of embedded into the task itself. So that part is just going to be however long the task takes. So for example, if you have a 15-minute writing assignment, then that's going to be about 15 minutes. You're just going to be sprinkling this language in to whatever the task is, however long it takes. And so that's going to vary. And then also there are things here where, let's say that you thought that the task was going to take you 15 minutes and then you realized that you did something wrong and we've got to backtrack. Again, we want to model, whoops, okay, we missed a step. It's going to take a little bit longer this time. That's okay. We're going to go back and fix it. Next time it'll be a little bit more, we'll move through it more quickly. Or if you realized that you underestimated how long it'll take, we might say something like, oh, well, we need to know next time. I guess we're going to have to plan for 20 minutes instead of 15 minutes. So these types of things, with am I on track? Do I need to change my plan? It kind of takes however long the task would take. So really, I can give you kind of a general benchmark for these parts, but for this part, this is going to vary based on whatever it is you're doing. And then once you're done doing the task, you've been monitoring, you've made sure that you're asking yourselves the questions and you've actually done the task, then we're going to kind of come back here and we're going to say, okay, am I finished? And then we can self-reflect a little bit. And again, this isn't going to be a long, drawn out 30-minute conversation. It's just going to be a quick, what did I do well? What will I do differently? And then move on. So just kind of a quick check-in, because that is ultimately what you would do if you were doing something. You'd be thinking in your head. You wouldn't be like, if you were in your kitchen making a recipe and you realized that you didn't do it the way that you wanted to, you wouldn't sit there for 30 minutes and reflect on it. You'd probably just kind of in your head think about it and save it for later for next time. So again, we want to model that out loud. And then the next time we do this, task, we want to remind kids of that, because that's going to help build that memory and help them take that information they learned from one experience and apply it to the future. Because if we don't externalize, kids are less likely to take information that they have learned from one experience and transfer it onto another, whether it be doing that same task or whether it be doing a task that is similar and there's some transferable information there. So that is why we're talking through this with kids. We want to make sure that we're doing this self-talk for them so that they understand what needs to be happening in their heads that they might not already be doing. And again, if kids want to use some type of a visual to, again, the journal itself is a visual strategy where they can look at the questions they should be asking themselves. That's something they can do as well. You don't have to necessarily tell them, okay, you'll have to do this in your head. You can't write it down. Well, that's not the point. The point is that we want to teach them to use strategies. So it is okay to teach them some ways that they can remember what things to think about. And that's the whole point of using a visual strategy. Again, usually with the evaluation stage, we want to make it pretty quick, just a quick check-in. Again, 3 to 5 minutes. At the very beginning, it might take a little bit longer because kids might not know how to answer these questions. You might have to model some examples of how they would answer the questions. But you can, as you get good at this, might even take you less than 3 to 5 minutes. I'm just giving you kind of an estimate so you know how long you should spend on these different tasks. And then again, am I finished? If you realize you're not finished, well, obviously you're going to have to go back to this right here, and it will take a little bit longer. But if you are finished, then you will just be able to move through this pretty quickly. The other thing, again, is that we want to make sure that when we're in this phase, we want to reference back to, all right, this is how done looks and feels. That's how we're going to be able to answer this question. A lot of times kids don't know how to answer this question, so they can never really self-reflect on this down here, and they don't have a good sense of how it actually looks and what it's like. And so as a result, they just don't really have that picture in their heads. They don't know how to execute the steps in order to get there. And they also appear like they're being lazy and unmotivated, because how can you get yourself motivated to do something that you can't even envision? Of course, you're not going to feel like doing it if you don't know what that end success looks like. So this is really important here to tie this back to this up here. We want to mention the end time again, because we always want to be drawing attention to that clock. And you actually, during this phase right here, want to be teaching kids to kind of look back at the clock, like, am I on track? Oh, whoops, we thought it was going to be, it was going to take 15 minutes, but we realized that it's taking a little bit longer. Or, if they're getting off track, doing something that they're not supposed to be doing, it's like, oh, whoops, our time's almost up and we need to keep getting back on track. So we want to be always referencing back to the clock, especially at the beginning and end, sometimes during, if they're getting off track and if they need some assistance with, managing impulses and making sure that they're focused on the task that they're doing so that they can get to that end goal and do it efficiently. But then also we want to talk about the end time, because what that's going to do is it's going to help them learn to estimate the time of different things that they're doing. Because a lot of times if they do have that time blindness, then what's going to happen is that, they might either underestimate how long something is going to take and not give themselves enough time and not get things done, or they're going to be overwhelmed and they're going to avoid it because they're going to inflate it in their heads, because it just is hard and overwhelming, and it feels like it's going to take way longer than it is, and they might worry, I won't get to have time to do whatever it is I want to do, and they can kind of get into that negative downward spiral of thinking. So if we're repeatedly drawing their attention to that end time and what that 15 minutes or however long, however that felt, then that's going to be really important. And again, pointing out that end time, just a quick thing here, again, just looking on the clock, again, a quick 30-second, oh, look, here's where the hand is. How long did this take? Again, that's something really quick quick that you can do. And then how hard is this? How do you know that? Again, this is just kind of a quick 1 minute question that you want to ask, which is the same as this up here. But the reason we're doing it afterwards is that we are just wanting them to use some new information that they have to see if they still think it was as hard as they thought it was. Because there are many times where it might have been hard, but maybe it didn't take as long as they thought it would. And so it's like, okay, it's not so bad. I can do this. And really that's what we want to affirm with them. And then again, affirmation is once you answer these questions, just a quick little mantra that you can give them that is a positive, something positive, some kind of positive feedback that you can say to them about what they did, something specific, not something general like good job, but something specific that they did well, even if they didn't actually meet their goal because of whatever reason, or even if they needed a lot of assistance to get to their goal. And, again, just something quick that you can model for them to give them that positive feedback and also to get them used to saying that, using that positive self-talk about themselves. So this is the overview of the time journal. There is an additional video that is longer where I go way more in depth about how to use it. So definitely watch that. It's going to give you a lot more explanation, but I wanted to give you this quick overview to help you organize this process in your mind before you get into that in-depth video where I really get down into the specifics. Thank you for listening. Be sure to check the show notes for the blog posts that I mentioned in this episode, specifically the one that includes both of these videos that you just listened to is called What's Better Than an Executive Functioning Lesson Plan? And then another one that will be helpful in understanding how I think about protocols versus lesson plans is the post that's titled Executive Functioning Support, 3 Paradigm Shifts for School Teams. And then finally, to learn more about the School of Clinical Leadership, you can go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/clinical leadership. And if you have any questions about how all of these programs and resources work, as always, it helps me so much if you share this with a colleague, if you found it useful, or if you know someone who might benefit from this information. And if you would like to make a suggestion for an episode, topic, or a guest, feel free to email me as well. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or know someone who would be a great guest, I'd always love to hear suggestions. And if you'd like to invite me to collaborate or be on your show, you can email me as well. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.